What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Young Guns podcast. And today we're going to be continuing our series of which teams are going to make the playoffs. And we're going to be starting off with we're going to be continuing with the New York Islanders, actually. That's going to be very interesting to see what happens with them. They fired their coach early on in the season, around maybe mid-January. Late December, early January, with Lane Lambert going out, bringing in Patrick Roy, and they are now only 2 points out of a playoff spot. With 7 games to go in the NHL regular season, and 2 points away from third in the Metropolitan Division. So this is a team that I think is going to surprise a lot of people, and I think have surprised a lot of people considering where they were before Patrick Roy came in. I think it's going to be a very close race to the end of this, to the end of the playoffs. You look at, some of the teams above them like Washington, Philly, Detroit, and then below them with Pittsburgh, Buffalo, and New Jersey, just super close around them. It's been a really close race, but it doesn't look like any team wants to make the playoffs, at least from the wild card race. It looks like everyone is not playing up to standards and up to where they need to in order to make it to the playoffs. So, Zach, what's your thoughts just on the Islanders, so far towards the end of the season? Do you think they have a shot? And let's start this discussion a little bit on this team.
Well, they started picking it up a little bit recently. In their last 3 games, they won 2. They're on a bit of a heater right now. They won back-to-back games last week. Coach Patrick Roy has shuffled the lines after the Friday game, which was the Friday of, you're projecting it here on the screen, their Friday game was against Florida. And on Saturday against Tampa, he shuffled the lines a little bit to give, he explained it as giving more well-rounded scoring throughout his lineup, with Casey Cizikas most notably moving up to the first line, Horvat playing with Engvall and Jean-Gabriel Pajot. But listen, this is a healthy team. They're as healthy as you could be going into this final stretch of the season. And if you look at the past 2 games and the past 5 games, they've been playing good hockey. But other teams that are playing better than them right now, yes, there's the Pittsburgh Penguins, who have been on a heater themselves, winning 4 out of the last 5, and they're playing excellent hockey right now. The Islanders are winning a lot of close games. They're beating the teams they have to beat. If you look at their remaining schedule, it is not bad. You play Montreal, you play Columbus. Those are 2 games that they should win, and you have some 4-point games towards the end of the season. Maybe they won't be by then, but if we're looking at the playoff picture right now, the games against New Jersey and Pittsburgh are going to be important. And obviously they have 3 games against playoff teams. So if you compare their remaining schedule against vis-a-vis teams like Pittsburgh and a team like Detroit, then they should be in good shape. This is they're an okay hockey team. They're 23rd and they're 23rd in the league in scoring. They have some good players, but this is mostly a team that is, like in years past, carried by good goaltending, as Semyon Varlamov has a respectable 9-12 save percentage this year, has played great in the times he stepped in. And obviously Sorokin, his numbers are okay, but if you compare that with what's been in front of him, he's been holding his own, and he's been stealing some games, as you'd expect Ilya Sorokin to do here.
Yeah, and what's interesting about the Islanders? So obviously we talk about this team, that's close in the playoffs. They've had 15 overtime losses this season, which means they've played a lot of close hockey games. And as much as people want to debate, whether the overtime loser point, is deserving or not, and whether teams should get a point for losing in overtime, at the end of the day, that's the rule. And the Islanders have done it 15 times. And so, for them, yes, they've lost a lot more games than they've won, but they're in that hunt because they've been able to find a way to get points, whether it's through winning games or through overtime. So, clearly they're a team that can play close games, and clearly they're in a lot of their games that they play. So it doesn't make them a bad hockey team. What I would say, though, about the New York Islanders is, this is a team that we've always talked about for years to have lack of scoring. Like if you look at their team right now, currently on their roster, they have two guys that have hit 30 goals in Bo Horvat and Brock Nelson, which is pretty good, right? You have Matt Barzal at 23, you have Kyle Palmieri at 24, and then you have Anders Lee, who has 19 goals. But it doesn't, the Islanders have never really been able to, find themselves a guy who can score 40 goals, someone who can, do it consistently. They've gotten great performances from Matt Barzal this season, who I think has turned the corner ever since Patrick Waugh joined the team. Noah Dobson's had a fantastic season, and if there wasn't other good defensemen in the NHL that were producing, he'd be in the conversation for the Norris Trophy. I think he'll get some votes. I don't think he'll win it. And then, Bo Horvat's, we all know how capable he can be as a good second line center. And Brock Nelson's always been underrated for them. So they definitely get, those guys, their top guys being their top guys, which I think is important. But at the same time, it kind of falls off after Brock Nelson. Palmieri, 44 points. He's got 24 goals. That's good. Anders Lee's not the same player he once was. JG Pajot, who last year I think was a 45, 50-point player, only 31 points this year. And then you have guys like Engvall, Holmstrom, who's got 14 goals, but a lot of them on the shorthanded. So they have a lot of guys that are, depth pieces, but not necessarily guys that thread the needle. And at the same time, they also haven't been able to get, some production out of a guy like Oliver Wahlstrom, who struggled lately. So again, I look at this team and I go, they've got some good pieces, right? Like Barzal's a great player. Dobson's really good. Horvat's good. Nelson's good. But after that, it's not really that appetizing compared to other teams that are, in the playoffs, and also teams battling in the hunt. I think a team like Detroit's better than them. I think you can argue to some extent that, the Pittsburgh Penguins, I think even though without Jay Gensel, I think on paper are probably as good in terms of offense compared to the New York Islanders, maybe not in net. But one thing the Islanders do have that a lot of teams that are fighting for the playoffs don't have is, like you mentioned, goaltending. Sorokin, his numbers haven't been fantastic this season, but they've been respectable. 907 is not great, but it's not horrible either. I think a lot of that I think he's struggled at times this season, and I think he hasn't always been at his best. But I do think he's still a competent goalie, and I think if he's in the playoffs, you don't want to face him. And then Varlamov, I mean, look, when he's come in and been called upon, like you mentioned, he's played well, 912 save percentage, 2 shutouts. He's looked good. But I do want to mention one last thing. Patrick Waugh has been a big difference maker for this team too. 14, 12, and 4 is his record with the Islanders since joining them. And he's made them play an entertaining style of hockey, a style of hockey that I think a lot of Islanders fans were preaching for. He's not a defensive coach. He wants these guys to go in and play their game and play it properly. But at the same time, they're playing both ends of the ice and they're doing it well. So I think the Islanders have found a different brand under Patrick Waugh, and I think he's the type of coach that holds guys accountable and is not afraid to do so. And I think he's been a really good revelation for them. Even if the record doesn't show it as like fantastic numbers, I think he's made this team a better team just by his presence alone and his coaching style. So I think that's been something that's been very impressive to watch over the last 30 games with Patrick Waugh since he joined in.
Yeah, I think Patrick Roy is he shouldn't be judged on how he ends this regular season in terms of the results. I think he should be judged in the kind of the strategic approach and how he's going to make this team, like you said, play better and be more structured and disciplined. And essentially what Patrick Roy wants to do is for this team to be a team that's going to be creating more and scoring more 5-on-5. And this is something that this team has always lacked. They've lacked scoring in general, but I think generating a lot of offense 5-on-5 is a team that hasn't done that, and they've had a more defensive styles in the past, and they kind of based their foundation on their goaltending, and that's a reason for that as well. If you look at their team stats this year, so I mentioned their power play before. No, I mentioned their scoring, which is 23rd in the league. Their power
Yeah.
play is also not very good. It's
Yeah.
it's not even in the top half of the league, and their penalty kill is actually 31st right now.
Wow.
So if you
Yeah.
look at their goalies numbers, I think it could be skewed down bad to due to bad special teams play. And
Yeah.
like overall, this is not a they're not a good hockey team in my opinion. They're if you look at if they would be tied in points with another wild card team, they definitely would have make it because most teams in their position, if we look at it here, if you look at the RW, which is their regulation wins, they have 24, which is
Right.
laughable compared to other teams that are averaging about that have 30 on average. Like you said, this is a team that squeaks out wins in close games. Has won a lot in overtime this season,
Yeah. And
and I
lost a
think
lot in overtime.
yeah. So they've been getting either the 2 points or the loser point, but nonetheless, that the overtime rule has been to their benefit throughout the entirety of this season. But
Yeah.
another thing for them is, you know, there is pressure on Lou Lamoriello to take this team to the playoffs again.
Agreed.
There is enormous pressure, and if you look at how they've allocated how he's spent some of the money on this team. I know there were some issues before his arrival, but you have a guy like Anders Lee who's making 7 million, and he's only going to be a UFA in 2026 here. He's got 34 points
Yeah.
in 75 games. A guy who was a perennial 30-goal scorer before the contract was signed. He's the captain of this group. He's only got 19 goals this year. You have a player like Brock Nelson
Yeah.
who's aging beautifully right now. He's on another expensive contract as well, though. And Bo Horvat and Matt Barzal, and you have all this money tied up to these four guys, and maybe even a Jean-Gabriel Pajot as well. And they don't really have the the cap to support these guys with better complementary pieces, and that's what they need. And their prospect pool right now, having in terms of prospects that are ready to take the next step, this is not a team that has that has that had a Ridley Gregg in their system, or a team that has that guy who would be ready to contribute to the NHL right away given the opportunity. So I think they're a team to wrap it all around. This is a team that's desperate to make the playoffs this year, and however, they're not a team that I think is gonna make the playoffs this year. I don't.
Yeah.
I think based on their form right now, their form is okay, but I think there's some better teams. Detroit is not playing the greatest. Philly has a little bit of an edge on them, but that might even not amount to much because look at their last 10 games. They're 2-5-3. But I think a team like the Pittsburgh Penguins are very interesting, and like I've mentioned in the last video, I think the Caps are a team that's gonna get in there.
Yeah. I'm gonna tend to agree with you on the Islanders, and I like look, I'm a fan of Patrick Roy. I think I said it when he went there that I think it was a great hiring for them, that I think he was gonna make them better, and that I would love to see the Islanders in the playoffs. I think the problem with the Islanders is their schedule. More than anything, I think it's that. I know they have Columbus tomorrow. Well, when we're recording this, it's the 3rd. They're playing Columbus on the 4th. Look, they got to win that game, but then they have 2 really tough games against Nashville, who's on a little bit of a losing streak at the moment, and the Rangers. And they play, 3 out of their next 5 games are against playoff teams. That can decide their fate right there. And I think that considering the fact that the schedule isn't favorable to them, and then their last 2 games has to be New Jersey and Pittsburgh, it's going to be tough for them to squeak in. But what's interesting about this is that, the Islanders, I feel like, and they've done it for years, when it matters most and when you need to be in the hunt for something, they always find a way to do it, right? I look at years that they've missed the playoff or made the playoffs, and everyone wrote them off, and they went to the conference final 2 years in a row, only for them to lose to Tampa in 7 games twice. And this is a team that, again, I can't really bet against them because I know what the Islanders are capable of when they get into the playoffs, and I've seen it firsthand with pretty much, I think, close to an identical roster for like 5-6 years, because I don't think they've really changed much from their roster from the team that got eliminated in 7 games to Tampa a couple of years ago. So I think, look, I'm gonna agree with you in the sense that I just don't think this year's the year. But what I will say is, if they do make it, I think they're gonna be one of those teams that is going to probably play spoiler and be an underdog in the playoffs, because I just the Islanders are that weird team, man. For some reason, they know how to turn it on when it counts and when it matters. And sometimes, even if they don't have the prettiest roster and the prettiest names and they don't play the prettiest style, they find a way to win. And sometimes that's all you need, right? And so I think, for me, I want them to make it. I think it would be a great story, and I think Patrick Roy bringing them there would be such a cool story, because I think he deserves it, and I think the Islanders fan base deserves it. I just don't think the schedule is in their favor in order for them to make it. And I think that, a team like Pittsburgh, who's, I think, shocked everybody with their turnaround over their last 10 games, and the fact that, some teams are dropping games here, I think some teams are going to pick it up. And I think it's going to be a big fight till the end, but I just don't think the Islanders are going to make it in. I think they're gonna just miss out, maybe by 1 or 2 points, and I don't think they're going to win the deciding games that they need to win in order to get there. But I hope I'm proven wrong, because, like I said, I want them in the playoffs, and if they make it, I'm going to be cheering for Patrick Roy and the Islanders for sure. So that's how I see it.
I respect that. Is there anything else that you wanted to add on top of that?
Not really. I mean, I think for me, like you said, one of the things that I think is concerning is, like you said, Anders Lee makes $7 million and, only 34 points in 75 games. I think if they would have gotten more production from him early on in the year, maybe a guy like JG Pajot as well, if they would have had more production from him as well, I think you could argue that they'd probably be in a better position. I think the fact that they didn't have Ryan Pulock and also Adam Pelech, who both got injured for 6 weeks at points during this season, I think hurt them defensively as well. So I think that played a role for them, is they didn't get, let's say, the production from guys they would normally get production from in the past. And also the fact that they lost, 2 significant pieces on their back end for long periods of time, close to 6 weeks on both of them, I think played a role in where they are right now. But, they're healthy at the moment and they still have a shot. So that's kind of where I'm at. But it's hard for me. I like the Islanders this year. That's why I don't want to bet against them. I look at their schedule, like the 2 games against the Rangers and that game against.
I mean, it's not bad if you compare it to other remaining schedules. This is, I think the thing that's throwing you off is getting the Rangers twice. But if they're in the position that
games, that's the thing. It's because your next 3 of 5 games matter, right? Like, yes, like you said, the 2 games against New Jersey and Pittsburgh, like if they get there, it's probably 4-point games. But the thing is, you have to get there, right? And so to get there, you have to go through Columbus, which is not a big deal, and Montreal, which is not a big deal. But then Montreal's playing really well right now. So, they're a team that can spoil you at any moment. And then you have Nashville, who, yes, have struggled, but it's still Nashville. And you have the Rangers twice. And the Rangers, when they play rival teams, always want to beat them, right? Because the Rangers don't want the Islanders in the playoffs.
Yeah, but so it's better to play the Rangers twice in 3 games than play them, once a month, because I think if you lose the first game, it'll be easier for them to figure them out on the second. Let's say they split the series. You get 1 over 2 over the Rangers, and then you look at the other games. Okay, Nashville is a playoff team, but they're not doing well right now. They're still a playoff team. You got Columbus, Montreal, and then New Jersey and Pittsburgh are the games you have to win. Those are the 4-point games.
Right.
And that's what it's gonna come down to. Those games against New Jersey and Pittsburgh. And if you're not winning those matchups, then you're basically
You'll
saying,
deserve
hey,
to be there.
well, let's throw away our season, because those are the teams that are gonna make it if you don't. So they'll be playing those last two games like their playoff games basically, but like they don't have the, I don't know, for some reason I don't have the same belief in this group. Even if they were to make the playoffs, let's say they ended their regular season, they won two more games than they lost, and they made it and they qualified for the playoffs. I don't just seeing their playoff matchup, they'd be a wild card team. They'd either be playing Florida or they'd be playing the Rangers. Like, do you realistically think they're gonna squeak out of these series? It's not like Sorokin is standing on his head this year. Maybe things could be different come playoff time. But last year they won two games against Carolina. Carolina, was a team that had so goaltending. I think if correct me if I'm wrong, I think Ronta had to step in because Freddie Anderson got hurt last year.
Yeah.
There was that situation as well. But if you're playing against the Rangers, against Shesterkin, and then in Florida, you have playoff Bob, playoff Bobrovsky. This is not the same situation, and they're just not a team that's going to be good enough to go toe to toe.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to find out what happens over the end of the season. I think if they finish third in the Metro, they get Carolina or the Rangers. It really depends on which one. I think either way, it's a tough matchup. But the Islanders, if they get Carolina, they proved last year they could beat them. So I mean, I know that things fell into place in the sense where Carolina had injury issues, but still, I think if they play Boston or Florida, they're going to get their ass kicked. But we'll have to wait and see on what happens with that. But I don't know. I agree with you. I don't think they're going to make it. But if they do, I want them to, just because I'm a fan of Patrick Waugh, and I think it would be a cool story for him. So we'll see. But that's about it. I think for the Islanders, they don't wow me, and that's the thing with the Islanders. They've always been like that. They're not a team that wows people, but they find ways, and sometimes it's not always the best way. But listen, at the end of the day, if you win, it doesn't really matter. So
yeah,
that's how I see it.
So we'll end it on that note. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of the Young Gun Podcast. Make sure to check out our social medias, like this video, subscribe to our channel, check out Triple Diamond. This is Zach
and Luca,
and thanks for watching, guys.